So the Hate Crew initially had sent me this from just a couple of days ago from the AAIHS website. Tom Burrell and capitalist activism in advertising. Capitalist activism in advertising. Now, Tom Burrell is an author I'm familiar with, and someone who had worked in Black advertising communities for a long time, whose name I'm familiar with, read his earlier work, and I'm going to say books attributed earlier work attributed to him. Admittedly, I at the time have always thought, okay, this is again a sort of at the time I would have said it differently, but in today's, given my more recent focus and work, this is a Black capitalist argument and analysis of media and advertising. So at the time I wasn't really engaged, but it wasn't something that moved me. So this is an article by Christopher Boulton, and it's about initially it's really about the work of Dr. Jason Chambers, who has written a number of books about this topic and has a more recent book about Burrell, Advertising Revolutionary: The Life and Work of Tom Burrell. So this article here, which is linked in the show description, is more or less a hagiographic celebration of Dr. Chambers' work, whose work is itself a hagiographic celebration of the life of Tom Burrell. I'll just to save a little bit of time. But again, the link's in the show description. Feel free to read it. And if anybody feels that I've misrepresented anything, please put it in the comments, and I can always come back and revisit any errors I've made. But what I did do is get and start reading that new book. And to me, all of this is linked. So the way I'm going to argue it is that the politics that would allow for this journal to take an award from such a pro-Zionist outlet, particularly at this time, while at the same time, apparently, according to Hammer and Hope, be silent on the genocide in Palestine. Those same politics that would allow all of it to happen are the same politics that would deny a review of my work while supporting discussion of and publication of and writing about this work, which, as I wrote here in my notes, is sort of an antithetical reading or frame on the histories as I approach them. And what is ultimately summarized in that blog post and in the book is the desire for audiences, Black audiences in particular, but I really think the target audience is quite white, to see that Black capitalism and Black entrepreneurialism, shout out to Ear Doctor on the Remix Morning Show, are the equivalents of waging a battle for liberation. When what we see here should be interpreted more properly as the false reading of the inclusiveness that we're about to discuss. So in other words, instead of simply praising those Black folks engaged in Black media and advertising and commercial media spaces, I'm certainly not saying we need to condemn them as individuals and blame them, but I am saying we need to look more critically at what they were doing and how they defined political struggle, Black power, et cetera. And this book is another perfect example that the dominant frame on these issues is wrong and being often misrepresented by scholarship, pundits, commercial press, et cetera, and so forth. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of what I found in this book, and then I'll come back and I'll chop it up with the chat for a few minutes, and then we can move on. But from the beginning of this book, what is being said here about Tom Burrell and his time in advertising is that he, beginning in the 60s and 70s, deployed what is being described here as positive realism. In other words, he added, as is written here, black nuance and style, and as some of his contemporaries recognized, black soul. Before Burrell, blacks in TV commercials were replacements for the white models used in other arenas. In Burrell's hands, they became unique. So again, the book is about Tom Burrell and his time as a black advertising executive and as someone who, as we'll see, in championing black capitalism, has been part of, I would argue, a process that from then to now has led for many people to think that black entrepreneurialism, black capitalism, black presence, black faces in high places is still something to which we should aspire and is still a sign, should be seen as a sign of our collective success and as success itself, or ultimately, and even worse, that no real radical revolutionary change is necessary, that more inclusiveness and more praise for these black executives is all we need. And then to, of course, try to duplicate. So this concept of a positive realism and adding some vague black soul to TV commercials. For Burrell, advertisements were more than just tools to sell products. That was their first and most important aspect, but in his hands, they were also tools for positive propaganda about African American life and culture. So while there's a broader political struggle happening, while there's broader world struggle happening, we're meant to see a black ad exec as bringing that political struggle or carrying out that's waging that struggle in the halls of mainstream commercial white corporate advertising. And then even here, Du Bois is evoked, W.E.B. Du Bois, who said that art is propaganda and ever must be, despite the wailing of purists. I stand in utter shamelessness and say that whatever art I have for writing has always been used for propaganda, for gaining the right of black folk to love and joy. Similarly, Burrell saw advertising as a way of generating positive propaganda and altering how blacks were viewed by whites, and even more important, how they viewed themselves. So this is where I think the political sleight of hand starts to take over. And it starts, and this I think demonstrates an important shift or transition or part of an encouraged, as we'll see momentarily, encouraged transition from then to now. That is, while Burrell is coming up and doing this in the 60s and 70s initially, the argument here is that if Du Bois is arguing that all art is propaganda and should be, that even when you're doing it for Coca-Cola and McDonald's, or as Lupita Nyong'o is doing for De Beers Diamonds, it should be seen as some sort of subversive attempt to demonstrate the humanity and power and brilliance of black people, not only to whites, but to themselves. And again, just like Mtume checked me on the American fiction film criticism, it becomes, again, hagiography and defense and a praise song for the black bourgeoisie. Don't get mad at the black bourgeoisie for going out here and getting paid and making all this money on the backs of black struggle. Because what they're doing is waging a war for you. It's very slick. And this reference here to Jeanette Dates and William Barlow, whose work I've taught for years, William Barlow in particular in my radio courses, who even worked at WPFW in Washington, D.C., where I did briefly. Shout out to them. Dates and Barlow, who argued, I used to quote this all the time. They talk about that for black people in media, we have to understand that it's that images is warfare, that it's a war of images. For them to be brought up in this context to defend black commercialism and capitalism is, I think, an unfair, maybe even abusive. I'd have to go back and reread more carefully their work here. But certainly the way I interpreted their work and used their work, I think this is abusive of their work. Their work wasn't meant to teach us that black involvement was somehow subversive. It was meant to point out that that media are spaces of warfare, and image is itself combative. To turn that in, and same with Du Bois, to turn that into a defense of creating positive realism, as it said here, for mainstream white corporations, and it gets even worse, as I'll show you momentarily, is a disservice to the people I think that are being referenced, and certainly to the audiences being targeted here. The goal in referencing Jeanette Dates and William Barlow and Du Bois before them shouldn't be to encourage Black people into positively referencing Black corporate commercialized images and the Black people involved in producing them. It should be helping us understand that those images are being used as warfare against us. But in not doing that, and then having that work praised because, again, it came out on a university press, or it comports to a certain worldview, does a disservice again to what are at least nominally said to be the target audience. I highlighted this here because Smikle, the late Ken Smikle, publisher of Target Market News, said that what makes Burrell stand out is his own personal vision of how Blacks should be shown as members of society. And what I highlighted this for is because Target Market News, before Smikle's death, had been one of the major proponents of the buying power mythology. And I had even been involved in some Chicago radio debates with some of their representatives around this subject some years ago. So when I saw this here, it rang an alarm for me that this is, again, this book, this argument, its inclusion in AAIHS is an unfortunate promotion of a Black capitalist ethic that I think is troubling, and against which I've been, struggling for some time. Similarly here, the author praises some work that I'm becoming increasingly critical of, that is in terms of Black executives and entrepreneurs engaging in the commercial media space and being praised for it. So as it says here, he, meaning Burrell, used the market and principles of profit to advance his own business development, of course, and present a vision of Black life in America. So again, it should be recognized that the presentation of Black life in America that somehow garners massive white corporate advertising support, alarm bells should go off. Well, what version of Blackness are they presenting that is somehow seen as supportive from white corporations and ad buyers? And while Brianna Greer, or Brenna Greer, is an author whose work I'm reading, and again finding a similar criticism of, notes that we have overlooked the complex relationship of Blacks who operate as capitalists, we should not. In other words, this is a point that she makes, that we should not overlook the contribution of Black capitalists. And as she writes here, quote, "To exile capitalists and capitalism, however, prevents an understanding of how, in addition to marching in the streets, Blacks pursued their freedom by participating in political, corporate, and even racist or sexist agendas." But again, what I struggle with is this isn't presented with a sufficient level of criticism. It's presented as if they're somehow subverting something or advancing something. And as is said here, Burrell, ultimately, he did the thing that any entrepreneur can be proud of. He made a living and a difference in his chosen profession and the lives of the people that worked with him. So again, it's sort of this hagiography um, about the Black entrepreneur. But then here's where it really reveals itself to be a problem for me, at least, in the section titled Black Power. And this is where I find the confession is most noticeable. So they acknowledge that this is the time that Black Power as a phrase is popularized, but the response here is, how is Burrell going to use this moment of Black Power to identify the lane in which he's going to run in the advertising community, the niche as it's described here. Or as to stand out in a crowded field, he needed a different angle. That's how I came to niche marketing, he said. Burrell found his future agency's selling proposition, his niche, through his interpretation of the ideals of Black power. I said focusing on the African American market is the way to get in. While completing James Meredith's 1966 March Against Fear, activist Stokely Carmichael and Willie Ricks invigorated audiences with their call for Black power. But Burrell would interpret this differently or take advantage of this differently. Burrell had long viewed himself outside the mainstream of the civil rights movement and as in common cause with Black activists like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. So he's saying, I'm seeing myself with them. Really? Because what Burrell ends up doing is the antithesis. This is Stokely Carmichael who said Black power is not Black visibility, and yet Burrell's whole business is making Black people more visible in white corporate advertising. It was this phase of the movement that focused not on what we had in common with whites, but rather on taking pride in our uniqueness, our physical features, our hair texture, our ancestry, our customs and traditions, our differences, he said. The ideological undercurrents of Black power supported the planned Burrell agency. It would be an agency that created advertisements for Black consumers to incorporate their culture, values, and unique history and outlook. For Burrell, Black power was the missing link that brought a sense of self, a sense of self-worth, sense of self-esteem that could be effectively tapped through advertising. The ideals of Black power, as Burrell interpreted them, galvanized him and provided a purpose in terms of the strategy of the business. The Black consumer market became his way into that national market space. He said there would be no Burrell if there weren't any currency given to Black people. If there weren't any currency given to Black people or not dark-skinned white people, which would not have happened without Black is beautiful and Black power. So as soon as I can figure out this thing here, this new StreamYard update here, I'm going to come back over here so that I can say
message.
He's saying there would be no Burrell advertising agency. And by extension, there is no Black advertising, Black capitalist marketing field if there has not been first a Black power and Black is beautiful movement. This is exactly see. So when folks when books like this or scholars or anyone frames or looks to encompass Black struggle and references Du Bois, Kwame Ture, Malcolm X, Black power, and then use it to justify their Black bourgeois efforts, they're committing so many intellectual crimes and historical crimes. When Dr. King at the end of his life was saying, white liberals and the Black bourgeoisie, you all are you exhibit the greatest degree of vulturism by preying on the struggle and efforts of working class, poor, radical elements within these movements and taking advantage of whatever concession is offered and turning it into your own business opportunity while claiming that this is something for the people and claiming that this is your contribution to Black liberation. I'm unaware of any argument within Black radical circles that says if we could just have better representation of Black people in McDonald's commercials, we're making an advance. It's not even the conservative nationalist idea of we're going to have our own burger shops. It's a watered down version of even that. Blacks' differences from whites were not to be avoided in advertising, but it was to be embraced and used to stimulate a positive relationship with the brand. So as I've talked a lot about is in the Nielsen reports, the arguments around the conscious consumer. That's what they've been arguing. You don't even need to have Black ownership. You don't need Black employees. You don't need certainly to redistribute to Black communities. You just need to suggest that Black people that symbolically that you care about Blackness and you can create the conscious consumer because that's the primary thing Black consumers want, just some sort of symbolic affinity It's been argued. And to a certain extent, it's been black capitalist, black entrepreneurial, black advertising for white businesses that has helped advance that ethic. Right. Designed to incorporate blacks' unique culture and lifestyle into the product, with the product being advertised. Vince Cullors demonstrated that you could effectively commoditize the African American push for respect and pride in advertising. You could effectively commoditize the African American push for respect and pride in advertising, which is just another way of saying you can take advantage of black people's desire to see themselves more appropriately represented, and you can turn that into an effective way of selling them a product. So what do? Burrell goes and works for Ray Kroc in McDonald's. And there's nothing in here, by the way, criticizing how Ray Kroc came to get McDonald's. So, as again, we're meant to praise black media and advertising executives and black entrepreneurs and black capitalists, we're not getting the full story. Ray Kroc ripped off the McDonald's brothers. Again, I don't like to use movies too much, but go watch The Founder and watch that scene where the lawyer tells the founder how tells Ray Kroc how you steal this from them. And he said, you don't steal it by franchising, you steal it by becoming a landlord. You steal it from them by getting the land upon which McDonald's franchises will be put. And then you rent it to them. You become the so the whole point is, in the white world, whites are ripping off whites. In a white supremacist settler colonial situation, whites are ripping off whites. And yet we're being told that the solution to black inequality and oppression is to engage this community in the way that they want, to do what they do. So then all of this history of an affinity for black people loving McDonald's and being associated with jobs and McDonald's, this and the Calvin commercial that my generation grew up and all that kind of nonsense, it all starts here. And it all starts with, as they see, this is where they get this is the most twisted part of the whole thing. The reason he gets involved with McDonald's, the reason McDonald's wants to hire black ad execs is because what this section of the book it talks about, on the one hand, it's telling you the history of white flight, gentrification, or sort of reverse gentrification, that is, neighborhoods becoming black, neighborhood white people leaving, including the owners, in this case, of McDonald's, who didn't want to even show up to the franchises in black neighborhoods to do the business. So when Nixon comes in and starts talking about black capitalism and reaching out to literally to people like Ray Kroc to say, help me get this black capitalism thing over. Ray Kroc goes and finds black people, finds Burrell and his partner to do advertising for McDonald's, all as a subsidiary effort of Nixon's desire to have black capitalism be the redefinition of black power. And this book wants us to be praising that. This part blew my mind, that it's this. Nixon said it is no longer that enough that white-owned enterprises employ greater numbers of Negroes, whether as laborers or as middle management personnel. That is needed, yes, but it has to be accompanied by an expansion of black ownership, of black capitalism. We have to get private enterprise into the ghetto, but at the same time, we have to get the people of the ghetto into private enterprise as workers, as managers, as owners. Eventually, several programs established as part of the federal government support of black capitalism were a boom for the fast food industry. So there's so many mythologies being exploded here. One, that capitalism is some sort of free market enterprise thing, and I got something more coming for state. Just more on that. Just make sure you've liked, share, subscribe, and all those things. Same thing, because some of this is going to be over there in Black Liberation Media. So make sure you're over there too. Listen. So many myths being exploded here. On the one hand, the argument that capitalism is some sort of free market thing and individuals do all this by themselves and they don't really want government and government is bad. No, big business want to capture as as Taiwo puts it, elite capture government. They use public policy to protect and defend themselves. And in this case, when the more important political policy of managing public opinion, suppression of radical movements and revolutionary tendencies in oppressed communities, when that need becomes more clarified, as it said in this book, hey, Nixon, go get Ray Kroc and all your people, all your business people, hire some black folks, and you know what? Do the franchisee thing. Let the Negroes take care of the Negroes and Negro communities for you. And even hire some Negroes to do the advertising for those Negro franchisees and Negro communities for you. And to the extent, and if we can get this redefined as Black power and Black liberation, we, meaning all elite whites, win. And yet, these arguments are meant for us to praise this as liberatory. So my thing here isn't again to condemn the individuals of Burrell or even these authors here. My point is that these are the frames that lead so many in our communities and elsewhere to be confused as to how this is all happening and to what's all going on here. And why so many are resistant to the idea that we need to be more focused on outcome than opportunity. McDonald's operations were able to utilize advertising and marketing to develop a consistent national image of the company. So they hired Burrell. Yeah. That is, McDonald's hires Burrell to create a national image for it. And what we're not meant to understand is that this was all a subsidiary effort of recreating a national image in its entirety about what capitalism is and what black people who are struggling against it need to do. In other words, the national image, Burrell was not just rebranding the national image of McDonald's. That was what he was paid to do in his most immediate effort. But what they were really up to, because as this book even identifies, Ray Kroc from McDonald's was targeted as other business people by Nixon's administration to help spread this idea of black capitalism as a response to the uproarious version of black power being defined by black people like Hicks and Carmichael. And the goal of creating a national image of McDonald's as something, in this case, welcoming for black families was, again, a subsidiary of what Nixon needed to have happen, where black capitalism would be seen as recreating the national image writ large of the United States in being something welcoming and open to black capitalist, middle class, bourgeois advance. It said again, don't worry about political organization and mass movements. Just get busy in black entrepreneurialism. In fact, in another book I'm reading that I'll be discussing for Monday's show on Black Liberation Media, this is also a subset of what was being done internationally, as Milton Friedman and the Chicago School of Chicago University and the Chicago School of Economics had been developed specifically and funded by the same exact efforts to promote, even to Africans in South Africa, don't worry about apartheid, just worry about engaging the free market and starting your black businesses. Now, even black capitalists in the United States, I can't imagine even a black capitalist in the United States standing in front of a public black audience and defending that as an approach to ending apartheid. Even as they try to tell you here in the United States that this is an approach for success here. That only tells you they don't understand settler colonialism and they don't understand the joint histories of the United States and South Africa, among other things. But my point is, and I'm going to show you that on Monday. I'm trying to tell you this. Selfishly, I'm loving this new lane of history I'm catching up to, including some of the new literature. The book I'm talking about just came out last year. This one just came out now. The one I'm talking about for Monday just came out last year, and is the macro, another macro version of this. It is some bananas. Milton Friedman, the so-called godfather of my generation's neoliberal whack-ass economics and free market capitalism, he himself was a product of government and big business propaganda and promotion. Yet they want to tell you and me, don't worry about seizing political power. Just get your business together. And they know it's false. And then they dribble this down to black folks who then rebrand it, as Burrell made a career doing, as Black Power and Liberation. And then we're supposed to be confused in 2024 when people stand up to me selfishly, or any of us more collectively, and say, y'all are wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. And they don't even realize they're regurgitating Nixonian white analysis as they claim to be the black radical superheroes of the day. It is wild. And I just noted here, by 1971, McDonald's had done some local advertising and black consumers, two black consumers, the Chicago Defender and Ebony, showing you already that black targeted media outlets had already themselves begun to become, in one form or another, co-opted by the advertising model, and this would only become advanced through the process that I'm describing here, that this book is describing here. And again, the link to the in the show description to the initial article links to this book if you want to get your own copy and see if you can come to a different conclusion, or you just want to read beyond what I'm sharing here. Um, but as Burrell noted, in the early 1970s, as calls for black capitalism increased and attention to black entrepreneurs did so as well. Some of the money that black companies received was what their owners derided as goodwill money. It was merely a kind of affirmative action welfare from large white corporations to smaller black suppliers that Burrell wanted no part of. If you don't think that I can give you something of worth, then it means you're not going to give me anything of worth. You'll give me whatever you think or feel like giving me, and I'm supposed to take it and be grateful. That business did not fit his mindset or the agency's goals. See, but the problem, and the reason I highlighted that, the problem with that and what that does is it helps promote into today this idea, first, that that it is somehow radical to engage, as he does here in this next part here, Gillette, to sell Gillette razors to black folks, or McDonald's to black folks, or Coca-Cola to black folks. That's somehow depicted as radical because he's saying, I didn't just want the handout. And this is something we're meant to hear all the time as part of the business world's propaganda. You shouldn't just want a handout. You should want to work and earn everything. But as the people that they're looking to emulate know better than we do, they're not earning anything. They're getting government contracts and subsidies, tariffs and trade policy protections. They're getting all kinds of investments from their elite friends and family. The field is not level. They've not worked for anything. They've lived off the backs of movements and people in struggle, and then claimed that they're advancing those struggles by making money off of those struggles, while literally working for white businesses and corporate companies. But he turns this thing, this critique of black capitalism, as a handout, instead of using it as, look at what is said here in this previous page. Instead of using this as a teachable moment, it's used as a way to further chastise poor people for not being willing to take risks, or to engage in just good business. The reason it could be that black capitalism could be dismissed as affirmative action based welfare from large white corporations to smaller black suppliers is not because of some laziness or fallibility among black workers or businesses. It's because that's the nature of a capitalist economy, where the dominant sectors of that economy have already been consolidated in ownership, monopolized, and fully extracted in their wealth producing capabilities. So that's why we see, to this day, even in that $50 billion corporate post George Floyd assassination handout, they were saying we're going to use more black suppliers in our supply chains because the only area of the economy black people can get in as a business is in areas of supply, service. They can't get into to become major manufacturers or distributors or whatever else because even whites can't do it because again, there's only one Amazon, one Walmart. There's only Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. There's not this whole open. This book summarizes again how we're meant to see Black capitalism and Black entrepreneurialism as waging or continuing the Black liberation struggle when they are the antithesis of that struggle, or they are meant to play a role in mitigating and weakening that struggle. So when books like this praise Black business people for taking advantage of and performing the Nixonian definition of Black power as Black capitalism, it only adds to the levels of confusion among its audiences. And this is becoming, for me, an increasingly clear problem.